Whoa, hit the brakes. You've arrived at the #1 drive-by for American history. Welcome to The Pit Stop. Brought to you by In the Past Lane, the podcast about history and why it matters. Here's Edward T. O'Donnell, your host and historian at large.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Pit Stop, your Monday morning source for history on the go, in just about 5 minutes. Here's what happened in American history this week. This week marks the birthday of Walter P. Chrysler, the founder of the Chrysler Motor Company. He was born April 2nd, 1875, in Wamego, Kansas. He once said, "It devolves upon the United States to help motorize the world." April 3rd marks the birthday of the famed writer Washington Irving, who was born April 3rd, 1783, in New York City. Irving was the author of 2 American classics, Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. April 3rd is also the birthday of another New Yorker. William Tweed, otherwise known as Boss Tweed, was born April 3rd, 1823, in New York City. He went on to become the Grand Sachem, or the boss of the notorious political machine, Tammany Hall. April 4th is also the birthday of one of the great abolitionists of the mid-19th century, Thaddeus Stevens, born April 4th, 1792, in Danville, Vermont. He moved to Pennsylvania as a young man, became a successful lawyer in Gettysburg. He then entered politics and advocated for reforms ranging from expanded education to abolition. On that latter issue, he once said, "The principles of our republic are wholly incompatible with slavery." As a member of Congress during the Civil War, he became nationally known as a fierce opponent of slavery, and after the war, a staunch advocate of full citizenship and equality for former slaves. April 4th is the birthday of Dorothea Dix. She was born April 4, 1802, in Hampton, Maine. And you may recall from last week, she was the woman who in the early 1840s launched an effort to reform the way that Americans treated those suffering from mental illness. April 5th is the birthday of Booker T. Washington. He was born a slave in Hales Ford, Virginia, in 1856. In freedom, he grew up to become an educator and early civil rights leader, although one who advocated a go-slow approach that clashed with other activists for black equality, like W.E.B. Du Bois. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery, was published in 1901 and became an instant bestseller. April 6th is the birthday of Lincoln Steffens, born April 6th, 1866, in San Francisco. He went on to become an investigative journalist, or what they called a muckraker in the early 20th century, and he focused on political corruption in city governments, basically trying to take down political machines like Boss Tweed's Tammany Hall. His best-selling book, Shame of the Cities, was published in 1904, and in it he wrote, "The spirit of graft and of lawlessness is the American spirit." April 6th is the birthday of Rose Schneiderman, born 1882 in Poland. She immigrated to America in 1890. By the early 20th century, she was active in the New York City union scene, focusing on organizing tens of thousands of women who worked in the city's garment factories and sweatshops. She's best known for a speech she gave at a memorial in the wake of the deadly Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911, a tragedy that killed almost 150 women. There were a lot of prominent politicians and wealthy do-gooders in attendance at that meeting, and Rose let them have it. "We have tried you, good people of the public, and we have found you wanting. The life of men and women is so cheap, and property is so sacred, it matters little if 146 of us are burned to death. I know from my experience, it is up to the working people to save themselves." April 7th is the birthday of Daniel Ellsberg, born April 7th, 1931, in Chicago, Illinois. He's the guy that released the Pentagon Papers in 1971, a pivotal moment in the unwinding of the Vietnam War. He was arrested and tried under the Espionage Act, but ultimately acquitted. For events this week, let's start with the Pony Express. It began service on April 3rd, 1860. The Pony Express delivered mail and documents between St. Louis, Missouri, and Sacramento, California, a distance of 1,900 miles, basically using a relay system of horses and riders. Now, we know a lot about the Pony Express. It's kind of a legendary fixture in the American imagination. But the fact is it only lasted 19 months and never made any money. It was quickly supplanted by the railroad and the telegraph. And the reason it became legend was that Buffalo Bill picked it up later in the 19th century, and he extolled the Pony Express riders as exemplars of American manliness, courage, and self-sacrifice that defined the American West. April 4th, 1967, Martin Luther King delivered his A Time to Break the Silence speech against the Vietnam War in Riverside Church in New York City. In this speech, he said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." And he also warned against the, quote, "giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism," unquote. They were turning America from a society committed to justice to one obsessed with power and wealth. 1 year later, April 4th, 1968, 50 years ago this year, Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. He was there in that city to support striking sanitation workers. And the night before that assassination, he gave his final speech, in which he essentially predicted his assassination, but said he was ready to accept it. He said to the crowd of supporters that packed a local church, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter to me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." The next day, Martin Luther King was shot and killed. He was 39 years old. Okay, people, that's your 5-minute history fix to set you up for the week. Now put it in drive and go make your own history.